Hello, everyone. Welcome to another edition of the 498 Show. I'm Tony Palmieri from the Communication Studies program at UW Oshkosh, recording in late January 2026 on what is probably one of the coldest days I've ever experienced, minus 14 with like a minus 40 wind chill. But my guest today is in the warm weather in Florida, and her name is Kim Svoboda. Kim, thank you for doing this.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Kim is one of our most outstanding communication studies graduates of all time. I so admire her, and you'll know why listening to this conversation. She graduated in 1997. Very soon after that, was working for Harvard Magazine as an advertising manager and one outstanding young alumni back then. And since that position, she's gone on to so many impactful positions. I mean, she's worked for Habitat for Humanity, international or national account director for USA Today Education. She's worked for Keep America Beautiful. And right now, she is the senior director of philanthropy and partnerships and foundation giving for YMCA USA. And she's been doing that for over 2 years now. So, Kim, you've had these really high impact positions, and I'm raising a lot of money over the years, I'm sure.
Yes, I have a lot of goals to reach and a lot of goals that were obtained at the same time.
And yet, when you graduated in 1997, you really didn't know what you wanted to do. So we'll go back to your earlier, life story in a second, but
Okay.
let's start off with 1997. You graduate UW Oshkosh, and I remember that you were a good student, but you were a very quiet student. I remember you'd sit off in the corner of the room, and I thought, okay, Kim's thoughtful. But somehow, after you graduated, and I heard all these spectacular things that you were doing, you really did at some point find your voice,
I did. I
right?
did.
And so, yeah, what happened? So take us back to 1997 and what happened immediately after you graduated.
Oh, absolutely. So, right after graduation, I had a couple different jobs, and I think I was still trying to figure out exactly like where I fit, what I really wanted to do. I knew that in high school, and once I graduated from high school, I was always going to be a teacher. And I think when I got to college, I realized that I started taking education courses and it scared me. And what scared me was sitting in the same room with like thinking the same room with the same kids every single day, right? The walls were starting to close in. And I said, oh my goodness, I can't be in a work environment where I have to be inside every single day. And I think that was my moment that I really said, okay, I'm going to get through college and then I'm going to figure it out. I'm going to try a couple things, see, what I get excited about. It was very clear and evident, probably my very first job working at the Pioneering in the sales department, that I said, I like it, but catering sales was not my thing. And I said, there's got to be more. There has to be more.
Just so the audience knows, the Pioneer
Yes.
Inn was this really wonderful waterfront restaurant and hotel in Oshkosh for many, many years. I didn't even know until just now that you actually were
I did.
yeah.
I
So
did.
that
I
didn't
was
work for you.
It did not. I was only there for a couple of months. I will tell you my highlight though. While working there, one of our guests was John Kennedy Jr. at the time. And so
Wow.
all of us got to see him, and it was during EAA, right? So like all these celebrities were coming into town. And I used to do a little bit of the front desk work at the same time. And so that also was kind of my moment that I said, I don't, the sales stuff was fine at the time, but the catering thing, I don't know anything about that. But I had this opportunity to help a little bit at the front desk. And I said, oh, I kind of like this. I like to be able to meet people and really be like interacting with others. And so that's really, I would say that was probably my defining moment that I kind of discovered that, okay, maybe I could make a career of this. Like, what is it that I could do where I really could be interacting with either like C-level executives or celebrities or something along that line? And that was really, I would say, the moment that I thought, okay, it's okay to try new things. And I might be someplace for a year or two, but I was still young enough where I knew I needed to figure out early on in order to figure out what my path and how I'm going to set my goals going forward for my professional career.
Right. And then so from the Pioneer Inn, didn't you go into the Oshkosh Northwestern?
I did. I had a quick, so in between that, I worked at Fox Travel. I think it's called Fox World Travel now, or it might have
Yeah.
changed by now. So I left the Pioneer in after a couple months, went to Fox Travel, Fox World Travel, and I was there for probably about a year. And again, not a significant amount of time, but during that time period, I was hired as like a corporate, how do I say it? Like probably a corporate problem solver is probably the good way to
Wow.
look at it. And my job responsibilities was when Mr. Green travels, and let's say he's the CEO of whatever company and he has a really bad experience. I was the person that had to call the vendor, being the airline, the hotel, or the car rental place, and complain. And I was really good I was really good at complaining and negotiating what they were going to give to him in return after his bad experience. And
Wow.
so I had a nice portfolio, probably at the time, probably like 25 companies across the state of Wisconsin that I had to oversee any situations for their travel, like anything that happened on their travels.
Wow. And you were
Um,
still, at that time, you were what, 22 years old, 23 years old?
Absolutely. Yes, yeah. But I was really, really good at negotiating. So I used to get a
See,
lot of
again, Kim,
good
this is
like
kind of
returns.
mind-blowing for me because you were, again, you were this pleasant,
Yes.
quiet young woman sitting, right? Loved
Oh,
having you in
it's
class.
yes.
But then you get out and you're in these like very verbal, assertive positions.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, and I
Wow.
also think, Tony, just to kind of back up for a minute, I also think there's people that are really good at school, right? Like really like school is their thing. And I'm not afraid to admit I am to this day as a horrible I'm a horrible like test taker. It is not I probably am that person that gets a little anxiety even when I have to do work trainings and I
Oh
know
yeah.
there's 10 questions at the end. I'm like, "Oh my gosh, how am I going to get through this? I have to take notes." And so I think there's like skills that people just like, what you're good at, and you realize you're going to do whatever you can to get through it. And then to be able to reset and say, okay, I got through it. I did what I needed to do. But then what am I going to continue to do? And where are
Absolutely.
my strengths? Right. And
Yeah.
so I used some of those hidden strengths that I had when I was at Fox World Travel. And then decided that I like all this. I like this interaction with the community. Again, I wanted to be a teacher. And there was this random job posting I saw for the Oshkosh Northwestern. And that job position was a newspaper and education coordinator. So back in the day when newspapers were still really a big thing, you could actually use the newspaper content as a way to teach kids in schools,
Oh
right?
yeah.
And so I was responsible at the Northwestern and to be able to get teachers to use the content in the paper, but also as part of my responsibility was to sell the paper. So I had to sell the paper directly to the schools in the school district and get them to use it, but also work with companies or organizations to perhaps fund the cost of those papers to the classroom. So it was a combination of working with schools, still kind of being the educator role that I always dreamed of, but then
Mhm.
also figuring out, can I get people to donate money to be able to cover the cost of the product to the schools across the area? So I did that for a good like year and a half.
Did you enjoy that position?
I loved it. I loved it. Yeah. And I think the best part is, and I think about like some of the lessons I would share with people is that boss that I had back at the Oshkosh Northwestern to this day is actually my good friend. And so it's really awesome the importance of aligning with the bosses that are good. And being able to say, you know what? Yeah, I liked how we worked together. I liked everything about like his management style. And so he's kind of like the person I call like when I have professional questions now, many years
Wow.
later. But it's great to look back and say, from those good bosses, who are the ones that I'm going to stay in touch with?
Yeah.
And obviously, there's some of that. Hey, reality is you're going to have bad bosses in your life. But I've also looked at that as an opportunity that, yes, I don't talk to them. I don't talk to those anymore. But I also reflect on the fact of what are the things that I learned from having a bad boss, right? And thinking through, you know what, when I knew I wanted to become a leader, I was reflecting back on what are those skills that those bad bosses had that I would say to myself, I don't ever want to do that to somebody. So
Yeah.
it gave me the opportunity to be able to say, no one's perfect, but I also could look and observe and choose how I was going to lead people going forward as well. So a
And I
little
think
bit
it's
of a
so
side.
important that you had that supervisor boss at the Oshkosh Northwestern. It's almost 30 years now, and that person is still solidly in your
Yeah,
network. That
absolutely.
that is such an important lesson. We'll probably talk a little bit more about networking. And then, so from the Oshkosh Northwestern, is it from there that you went then to Harvard?
Oh no, I still had a little bit of a little journey in between
Okay.
there. So got promoted to the Post Crescent and worked at the Post Crescent because they were owned by the same newspaper company.
Right.
And then decided at the time I was ready to get out of the Fox Valley area and said, I want to head back towards Milwaukee area. And at the time, I actually knew the person that worked in the same position at the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel because I went to high school with her.
Oh,
And
wow.
I had reached out to her and said, hey, if you ever have an opening, I'd love to be considered. And sure enough, I got the position. And so used that as a networking opportunity, stayed at the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel for about a year and a half. And this was right before like the year 2000. Stayed there for about a year and a half. And ironically, during that time period, I had been going to all these industry conferences and networked with everybody in the newspaper industry. And I'll never forget this is I met somebody from the Chicago Tribune and I said to the manager of that department, I said, I will work for you someday. I said, somehow, I don't know when it's going to happen, but I know I'm going to work for you. And so I remember her saying, oh, I like this. Like, okay, Kim, at the time, sure, sure. We stayed in touch. And about a year and a half after the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel, she contacted me and said, I have an opening. Come work for me at the Tribune. And
Wow.
so I relocated to Chicago, was there again for probably about a year and a half. And it was an amazing opportunity. But, every single time I went to a different newspaper, it was more accounts, it was more responsibility, it was, different tasks and challenges. And when I left there, I just kind of knew like, oh, I want to try something completely different. Like this was the time I accomplished everything. I, was blowing out the goals. Like it was great. But I had friends that lived in Boston, and my friends had said, you know what? Just do it. Like you're still young enough. Come to Boston, live with our friend, like live with this group of friends at this house in Watertown, Massachusetts, and
Wow.
like just do it. And I started applying for jobs and saw this position for a regional sales advertising manager and got the position and relocated probably like not even 2 weeks later. And it was great because I already had a place to live.
Amazing. And so so that's the Harvard Magazine job.
Yes,
So
correct.
you were raising substantial sums of money in that position, right? Tell
Absolutely.
us
Yeah.
about that.
Yeah, so I would say that if you think about it, it was the alumni publication of the university, but the publication itself, had a huge amount of people that were readers. The average demographics of the reader was $1.2 million. And so, which again, and that was in 2000, right? 2000, 2001. I would love to see what the demographics are now. And so my responsibility was really high-end advertising. And so thinking about your high-end demographics and thinking about like it might have been travel organizations, it might have been local jewelers in New England, or local jewelry companies like nationally. There was also an opportunity, which I always thought was made sense. The alumni publication had a really good singles part of the magazine. So
Mhm.
anybody that was single and looking for significant others, they could pay like significant dollars for ad money. And so which
Pre-internet dating.
yes,
Amazing.
yes, yeah. And the common ground, right? They were all Harvard alum. So like there's all this research and stories about like Harvard alum meeting each other while they were in college, starting these incredible businesses, right? Like we all hear those stories. And so one of the safe ways at the time was for them to be able to meet through the publication. And they used to have all these dating events and we'd get sponsors for them. Yeah. So it was a really interesting time.
One thing I want current students listening to you, Kim, to pick up on is we're now talking you're 5, 6 years from your graduation date,
Yeah.
and you've already had 5 or 6 different jobs. And it seems like the common thread in all of them is that you were working your network heavily.
I was.
Isn't that
Yeah.
amazing?
Yeah,
And here we are 30 years later, and that networking is more important now.
that's right.
And
That's right.
what a great role model of how to do that. I mean, you get, you talk to someone at a meeting who's in Chicago, you move to Chicago. You have
Yes.
friends in Boston, you go to
I
Boston.
moved to Boston.
You had a friend in Milwaukee, right? I mean, everywhere it's the same
Right.
the same story. So so it's at that time at Harvard where you get the Distinguished Alumni Award. Let's go back for a second. Where are
Okay.
you from originally?
Yeah. Born and raised in Racine.
Okay.
And in my family, my both of my parents, so my parents, just a little insight, for me personally. So my dad actually worked for Eastman Kodak as a field engineer for 37 years. And so my dad was always on the road, right? Like he would go around fixing like photography machines and absolutely had a great career at Eastman Kodak. Really, really, really great career. And to this day, he'll tell you it was like one of the best companies for him to work at. And then my mom was a program director for kinder care learning centers. And so she was responsible for, all of the activities and lessons. I think what's really interesting is neither one of my parents went to college, right? But they really felt strong that between my brother and sister and I, that all three of us go to college and, do whatever it takes to get into college and really, really be able to give back and help other people seems to be the theme in my family.
Yeah.
And it looks different for me, from myself, my brother and sister, but we're all in roles where we're either like consulting with people or becoming, having patients or clients and helping people navigate, some of the direction that they may need help on in their personal lives or
Yeah.
even professional lives.
What was it like growing up in Racine, Wisconsin? I mean, for people who don't know, Racine and
Yeah.
Kenosha they're kind of like twin cities in a way, aren't they?
Absolutely.
And
Yeah,
Kenosha has got the reputation as more of the working class,
correct.
and Racine is kind of like, how would you describe Racine? More of like the artsy?
I think so. And I think back in the day it used to be that kind of the opposite, really.
Oh,
But then,
really?
yeah, but then I think what happened is you got so many people coming from Chicago that ended up more in Kenosha. And then you're seeing this kind of big urban sprawl now where I always laugh because when people ask where I'm from and if they're not familiar, like if they're from like other countries, I just say Chicago because it's too hard to explain to them
Really?
all the time. All the time. Or if I get into cab with
Wow.
a cab driver and they say where you're from, I'm like, oh, just say Chicago. It's so much easier.
Oh,
So,
man.
because I think when you look at a map, right? And Tony, you from being, especially from being from New York, but when you look at a map of Chicago and you look at like the circumference and all the cities around, like, yeah, it's still Chicago. It's the same thing in New York. You may live 2 hours, you might live on Long Island, but you still probably say you're New York City because it's easier, right? So,
Wow.
yeah, yeah. But I
That's
would
it.
say, yeah, I would say, I mean, growing up in Racine was phenomenal. And I am so grateful that I was able to really, I think there's a couple of things. I think about a lot of the companies and the headquarters that are based there, right? And being able to see their commitments back to the community was, again, it'll lead up to kind of the work that I do today. But
Right.
always seeing that every single day to say that these companies care about the communities that they're based in, they give
Yeah.
back, they support them. I was grateful that my grandparents were really philanthropic and always gave back in the community. And so that too, I think was really important, especially knowing that there were so many, it was a big diverse city and still is.
Oh, yeah.
And that I was able to learn a lot of different things about how to work with other people, other cultures, other backgrounds. And I think that's what really made me feel comfortable professionally living in different cities. And even, again, we'll talk about in a minute, but even spending my almost 20 years in New York City. Like
Oh, absolutely.
that
We'll get
wasn't
into
a
that.
surprise to me when I went to New York and I'm like, okay, great. This is where I belong. Like I felt like it wasn't a hard thing for me at all.
Yeah. So now what went into the decision to come to UW Oshkosh, which I guess is about what, 2 hours from Racine?
Yes. Yep. So the biggest decision for me was my sister was already there. And so my sister was going to school for social work and her and I were a year apart to the day, which is really unique. And so growing up as kids, I was really, really close to her. And so I just felt like, okay, I wasn't ready to like completely get rid of my sister. But I also knew that because I was also interested in education, I knew going to Oshkosh was a good choice for education at the time. And I also would say that less than the 2 hour commute, like to be able to go home for the weekends. Again, my grandparents were still around at the time. I wanted to be able to still be able to go home and spend time with them. And
Oh,
so I
sure.
I would say that those are the three factors. But I think having my sister there was kind of a little bit of a comfort zone. And then ironically, which I always thought was funny, is, I was like, okay, she'll be there, but I won't have to see her all the time, but she'll be there if I need her. And then I got the dorm room assignments, right? My first year of college. She ended up being my neighbor.
Oh, wow.
So,
Did you live in Scott Hall?
Taylor.
Taylor Hall.
Yeah,
Wow.
yeah.
Amazing.
So,
So, you wanted to be a teacher, but that wasn't going to work out.
right.
So you then gravitate toward the speech communication major.
Yes.
What led you to speech communication?
Yeah. So again, a couple of things that led me in that direction. One of them being I had met other students that were also in speech comm and
Oh,
were working on. I think at the time there was probably like two or three people. It was probably they had already been like sophomores or like, second or third year in college. And they're the ones that actually really convinced me to take that direction. And they said, the opportunities for you to be able to look at all different areas professionally, this would be the best fit. And I also will say that I had the incredible help of Ted Balzer.
oh yeah, the late
Yes,
Ted Balzer.
yes, yes.
Wonderful man.
Yes. And so I remember walking into his office and crying one day saying I didn't know what I was doing with my life. And I would say it was probably, I didn't really go to his office and probably until like probably my sophomore year. And he really was the one that helped me navigate to really consider thinking about speech comm and knowing that I had these hidden skills, right? Like I may not have been the best student, but I think he saw in me the potential to say, you know what, this may help her professionally later down the line. So
You know,
I was really
for
grateful.
people who don't know this man, Ted Balzer, the late Ted Balzer, he was one of the most inspiring human
Yes.
beings I've ever met in my life. I mean, this guy, he lit up every room he walked into. His sense of humor, as you recall, was just
Mhm.
infectious. And hearing this story about how he got
Yeah,
you to now I appreciate him even more deeply.
that's right. That's right.
And so he led you to come. And what are your recollections about studying communication?
Oh, I have some good stories. So I remember actually one of the best classes I had, Tony, was with you, where it was like the history of rock and roll, where we did
Oh wow,
like
that was the early
analysis.
days of that class.
Yeah, yes. And I remember as one of the assignments, we had to pick a musician and really like identify like their type of music and what was the messaging behind it.
Mhm.
And at the time, which I think was funny, was I remember choosing Billy Joel. And I think I looked at the song We Didn't Start the Fire, right? And so all of like the political messaging behind it and all this chaos and going on in the world, which is awfully ironic because then you think about today and you're like, oh, not much has really changed. And so I remember that class. And I also remember Joseph, oh,
Joe
yes,
Gemin.
yes, yes, Joe Gemini, yes. And I remember we watched the movie Goodfellas. And so I think for me, like I love that it was actually like real world like application. And to this day, I have to tell you, I think about when we were sitting watching Goodfellas as a class, and I remember him teaching us the importance of like looking at the group as a whole and how they interact with each other and how each person and of how they communicate, how it affects the entire group.
Right.
And I hold that like really basic lesson really close because I think about that a lot, even in my current work situations. When I see situations happening and I might be in a meeting with 15 people and I can watch and analyze and observe like those dynamics that are happening. And so I'm not saying that, my work is a mafia. I don't want to say
Right,
that,
right, right.
but I think it's important to observe and to watch how people interact in any situation when it
Oh
comes to big
yeah.
groups like that. So,
Yeah. Oh wow, that's incredible. By the way, I remember back in the day, Dr. Gemin and
yeah.
I were really great friends at that time. He
Yes.
retired maybe 8, 9 years ago now.
Okay.
Yeah. but there were students that would have his class and then my class back to back, and they would
Yes.
very frequently say, "Goodness, that's like 2 hours of like pure
That's
intensity."
right.
Right?
Yes, yes.
And I think he and I had very different styles, but I think what we shared in common was this commitment to critical
Absolutely.
thinking and critical thought.
Right.
And yeah, that's wonderful. So, all right, so we go back to Harvard University. You're very
Yep.
successful there to the point where you get awarded a Distinguished Young Alumni. And then what happened right after Harvard?
Yeah, well, then I fell in love. I mean, relationships take you in different directions. And
Yeah.
so at the time, my husband was based in New Jersey. And so I said, you know what? I knew growing up, and even, probably when I was in about middle school, I knew I was going to live in a big city. There was like, that was always, and I knew professionally, in order for me to get there, I had to climb this ladder, right? Like I already knew in the back of my mind, you're going to get there, but you've got to have your plan into place.
Hmm.
And so I decided, I said, you know what? I can go back. I can go back and I can go back into the newspaper industry. And again, at the time, I actually knew somebody that worked at Newsday on Long Island. And I stayed in touch with that guy and he was amazing. He was an amazing guy, but I knew I didn't want to work at Newsday. I was like, oh,
Really?
I already did all this amazing stuff. Like, if I'm going to move to New York, I want to go big or go home, right? And so he was such an awesome person that he said, well, Kim, I heard that the New York Times is hiring somebody, but I also know that there's these other job openings. And so it ended up I applied for jobs at the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, and USA Today.
Hmm.
And I said, all right. I came back, and each of them was still kind of like that newspaper and education and working with educators and working with companies. But each of them had a totally different feel, as you can imagine, right? Three totally different publications.
Oh, sure.
And I was offered positions for two of them and had to decide. And I decided, I said, you know what? These people at USA Today are really awesome. And I couldn't get over the fact that it was so diverse, so dynamic, and everybody just really worked hard. And the commitment to wanting to see the publication succeed was so apparent to me. And so I just said, that's it. That's where I'm going to go. And so again, it was probably not even like a month. And I quickly had to find an apartment in New York on Staten Island because it was the easiest place to find.
Oh, yeah.
And said, all right, let me just do this. And that's when I started my career at USA Today for almost 10 years.
Absolutely incredible. So was the office in Manhattan?
The office, so good question. So the department that I worked in, the national headquarters was actually in Tyson's Corner, Virginia, like the
Right.
DC area. There was an office in Manhattan, but there also was an office on Long Island in Port Washington. And this is probably going to blow your mind for you and your students. So I knew that I had to report to the Long Island office. Once in a while, I'd have meetings at the Manhattan office. And I think there's times in your career you do things because you know it will lead you to the next big opportunity.
Hmm.
I would drive from Staten Island to Long Island every single day, which for a lot of people, they probably don't really realize how long or how like awful that commute would be. And so on a typical day, I would leave Staten Island at 6 a.m. to get to the office by 8 a.m. So almost a 2 hour commute. That's if the traffic was okay. And then I would stay at the office until like 7 o'clock because if I didn't stay long enough, I would run into airport traffic at JFK Airport.
Oh
So
my
it was better for
goodness.
me to stay like until 6:30 and then drive home. And I did that for probably the first 3 years of working at USA
So you're
Today.
out at you leave your home at 6 a.m. and
Yeah.
you stay at your Long
Yeah.
Island office until
Till
7 p.m.
6:30, 7 o'clock at night.
6:37. So then you get
Yeah.
home at like what, 8, 9?
It was probably 8:30 because the traffic would be a little bit better. Um,
Wow.
it was crazy. And so the best part, right? There's always a good part of the story. So the best part of the story was that for me, the commitment and the amount of work that I challenged myself with had opportunity for me to get promoted a couple of times while I was at this job. And so I remember the boss at the time said, "This is ridiculous. You do sales, like you 4 hours of your day commuting, like that could be 4 hours of you making appointments." Or, a lot of my clients and donors and school districts that I was working with obviously were all in Manhattan.
Hmm.
So my boss was awesome in the fact of saying, "I would rather you not do that commute every single day." And so we changed it. And I think I would go to the office maybe 2 or 3 times a week, and really when it was only necessary. And then I did that for a while. And then I will personally say, and I would say that this is probably my best, like probably best and most emotional part of my journey professionally. I had one person at the headquarters at USA Today that believed in me, like really believed in everything. And I mean, my bosses believed in me, but this one vice president believed in me and knew my potential and saw my potential. And that person who was at the headquarters, when she saw me getting like these promotions at the local level, like even though I was with USA Today, I was
Yeah.
still working more at the regional level and regional office, but then some of it was like national. It was pretty complex organization at the time. And she saw this thing in me. And I will tell you, by far to this day, again, is my biggest professional mentor I've ever had in my life.
Wow.
And I love her for the fact that she was working in an industry that was, as you know, Tony, and especially in the newspaper industry, dominated by men, right?
Yep.
And so like I look back and I think about back in the 80s and all the things that she had to go through to be able to be successful in her role. And now it's awesome because she challenges me, even though I don't necessarily like work with her day to day or anything anymore. But we talk like every day, and I will run past like situations with her and say, "Hey, how would you handle this?" Right? So to me, like that by far is I think my moment that I said it's really important to think about who are those mentors that you're going to help that are going to help you professionally. And she also helped me think through any times after that of if I was going to change jobs. Like, are you sure you want to do this, but you're giving up this? And is this important to you? So 10 years at USA Today, which was again one of my most incredible colleagues I've ever had the pleasure to work with.
Yeah, and I really love what you say about professional mentorship because I think that the American workplace does not emphasize that enough.
Right.
And yet, when we look at your experience, here it is. You're now many years removed from USA
Right.
Today, and you almost every day
Yeah.
are still connected with your mentor. That's
Yes.
extraordinary. And is she still with USA Today?
No, no, she retired
Okay.
probably a good 10 years ago, but
Wow.
was working on and ran the USAID Charitable Foundation at the time. So she still runs that, but it's under a new name and everything else. Yeah.
Excellent. All right.
Yeah.
So you make the decision to leave USA Today, and then what happens?
Then Hurricane Sandy happened in New York.
Oh,
And that
wow.
was my other moment, right? There's all these little moments from my career. There's signs, and I believe in looking at these signs when they're right in front of you. And when I was at USA Today, that was really the time period where like print media and media in general, like newspapers were really like that was the end, right? So my department was slowly being minimized. And I knew it was like, oh, I better think about what my next opportunity would look like.
Mhm.
And during my 10 years at USA Today, I really was focused on like corporate partnerships more than anything. So if you remember back to my days at the Oshkosh Northwestern and working with companies and getting them to fund like newspapers to school. So I had built like these really awesome partnerships at USA Today. And
Yes.
it really morphed into beyond just like curriculum and content to then we were working with companies on creating competitions for kids, right? Where it would be a national competition on STEM or whatever have you. And so anyway, so that experience, I kept thinking, well, how do I use all these corporate partners? I have this awesome like portfolio of companies and contacts. And Hurricane Sandy happened. And that weekend after Hurricane Sandy, I remember watching people on TV on Staten Island and people were crying because they needed help with their houses. The houses were getting flooded and like, what are we going to do? I put stuff in my car and said, I don't know where I'm going to go. I'm just going to show up and I'm going to go help people. And I said, oh my gosh, like this is it. I felt like in my heart, like I need to do something where I'm even helping people more.
Wow.
And started to get online, started looking at positions. Ironically, the job at Habitat, I didn't know anybody at Habitat for Humanity, but I saw a job posting and I said, I'm going to apply and really spent a lot of time targeting my resume towards that specific job and saw this position that was to be a remote position based in New York City, but reporting to the office in Atlanta. And fast forward, I went through 9 interviews. At the time, they were very intense. And this is before remote work was really a big thing.
Yeah.
And so they really wanted to make sure that if this person was going to be remote based in New York, we had to make sure we had the right person. And so did all the interviews and then ended up at Habitat for almost like 7.5, 8 years. And
And
specifically,
what was your title at Habitat?
yeah, corporate development officer. So only working on corporate partnerships and working on big national partnerships to support the 1,100 US affiliates and or the 70 plus international countries across the globe.
Can you give me a sense, Kim, of you said 9 interviews.
Yeah.
So how much time passed between the first interview and the ninth interview?
So they were very slow. I started interviewing in November and landed the job in March. And so part of it was mostly because the holiday time period was a little tough, right? But what they did is they wanted me to meet, and they flew me down to Atlanta to meet like 3 of the people and was a panel interview. Then I had individual interviews with the person who also was in the New York region but did individual giving. But I would still have to be sharing a small little office, like it was one of those like rental offices that was only, big enough for 3 people at the time. And so
Mhm.
I had to meet that person. And then I had to meet like 2 other people that were in this role across the country as well. So it was intense.
It actually increases my respect for Habitat
Yes.
that they are that rigorous and
Yes.
thorough in their selection process. I mean, it's
Absolutely.
because obviously you were going to be involved with multi-million dollar accounts.
Correct.
I mean, they
Correct.
want to make sure they've got the right person in that position,
Absolutely.
and kudos to them. But how, I mean, by the third, fourth interview, were you like completely stressed out? Like maybe I should give
No,
up?
no, because I think again, it's a lesson to be learned that I was still interviewing, applying for jobs elsewhere too, right?
Yeah.
And so I think, and I knew in my heart that I would love to say that you get one interview and the job is yours, right? That's just not how it happens. And
No,
so I
not for
think
those types of positions.
no, no. So I knew the competition was going to be fierce. But I also knew that I needed to be patient. And if it came, great. And if it didn't come, I knew the right job would come along. And I mean, to be honest, like I had got offered like some really awesome jobs, like really awesome jobs, more so like still back in like the education type of world.
Yeah.
But the factors that came down to me was the amount of travel was really important. Like I didn't know how much I really wanted to be on the job or I'm sorry, on the road. Um, and one of the jobs that would have been I loved everything about it, but it was 80 to 90% travel. And I just said I don't mind the travel, but I
Right.
said I have a life, like I do. And so that to me, like I had to say no to that, but knowing I still had these other interviews coming up with Habitat.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
And so how long was the Habitat job? How long were
I
you
was
there?
at like 7.5, 8 years.
Okay.
So enough to really make an impact. And,
Yeah.
it was great because, I was fully remote, but again, I have the utmost respect for my colleagues at Habitat. I still have great relationships with them. For me professionally, it was just time to look at something new and to say I wanted a bigger role and a bigger challenge. But again, I have all the respect in the world for my colleagues that are still there and my management and the team that's there, and they continue to do great work. And I learned so much professionally there, which again, I don't know where else I would have learned as much as I did, especially for the nonprofit sector, but having gone to
Absolutely.
one of the top 10 largest nonprofits in the country.
Hmm. And so where does the Foundations for Impact on Literacy and Learning fit in, which you've been doing?
Yeah.
You're still doing that, right?
A little bit. I still do a little bit work with like helping with some of the teacher like interaction.
Okay.
So if you recall when I was telling you about my awesome mentor from USA Today,
Yeah.
that's the foundation that she now runs. And so I
Oh.
still help her a little bit with some of the teacher interaction and engaging teachers in various programs and projects across the country.
Yeah, you produce materials for schools,
Yes.
right?
Yes, yes. So it'll be like different lesson plans and curriculum and things like that that then the foundation then distributes to classrooms across the country. Yeah.
That's just incredible. And what a great way to
Yes.
stay connected with your mentor.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And so then, so from the habitat position, is that then when you get to the YMCA after
It
the,
is.
all right.
Yeah.
How did
So
that
and
happen?
so right after the pandemic, right, is as you can imagine, um, nonprofits were looking for good fundraisers and the job market was incredible. I mean, I hate to say that something really good came out of the pandemic, but it did for me professionally. And there were so many opportunities for people that had experience and came, to the table and to the organization with a portfolio of contacts. And so at the time, I just said, you know what? I got to start looking like there wasn't a lot of room for me to grow at Habitat because it's nothing bad against them, but there wasn't any pattern in place from the direction of thinking about what's next for some of the employees. And so
Right.
I really had to think like, okay, like what am I going to do next, right? And so I'm sorry, I did not go directly to the Y. I went to Keep America Beautiful for a year. And
Oh, that's
that's
right.
where yeah, yeah. So this is why I had to put my little cheat sheet in front of me.
Yeah.
So I was at Keep America Beautiful for about a year. And again, great experience, was excited about the work, led some new projects for the organization. And that really was my ultimate goal. But I then saw this opening for the YMCA and said, wow, this is really incredible. It's really taking everything I've done professionally and being able to go back and do something even bigger because it was a bigger job title too, right? And so I also knew that the Y was going to soon be celebrating the 175 years of having a presence in the US. And so I said, oh, I kind of like the
Oh.
idea of being able to like do some work around that campaign. And so again, went from Keep America Beautiful, did not know anybody at US or at the YMCA, but I knew enough people that had worked at the YMCA previously, and the experience that they had was incredible. So applied, and then I think it was probably not even for them, it was pretty fast. It was probably like 2, 3 weeks. And I was already, doing my resignation at my old job, and it was already in place at the Y.
What's striking me, or what's striking listening to you, Kim, is that
Yes.
you've you've developed this reputation, skill set, attitude, that is so sought after,
Yes. Thank
right?
you.
I
Yes,
mean,
absolutely.
I mean, what you've done in these positions is something that is so important, not just for the large companies that you've worked with, but also for
Right.
small companies, right?
Absolutely.
Someone that
Absolutely.
knows how to connect with strategic stakeholders in the
Mhm.
community, nationally, globally, and what have you. And I can't think of a more valuable communicate or more valuable college degree to have for what you're doing than
That's right.
communication.
That's right. That's
Is that
right.
right?
Oh, absolutely.
I mean,
I mean,
in all the
yeah,
positions that you've had, Kim, what percent of your success has been because of your communication ability?
at least 90%.
Yeah.
Maybe even more. Maybe even more. And it's so true. I mean, I will say that in my current one, all these jobs, right? Like my day-to-day job responsibilities in any of these roles are often working with like C-level, C-suite executives. And so I have to be able to sit down with them, talk the talk, understand their industry, even if I don't know anything about their industry, right? Like preparing ahead of time and say, you know what, I better start learning about, it could be home building or it could be, finance or it could be food service, whatever it is. But I have to be able to talk the talk. I also have to be, in some cases, really direct, right? And Tony, I think, you'll appreciate this, but if I'm meeting somebody in New York and I'm sitting down with a C-suite executive in New York, I'm going to probably be talking with them a little bit differently than I would somebody in the South, like just based on like how, like what the work, like kind of professionalism in those environments, right?
Yeah,
It's just a little bit different. And so I've been able to like really target in to say, okay, I know that if I meet with this person, this company, they're based in New York, they're going to tend to be a little bit more direct. They're not going to have a lot of time for me. Where I have clients that might be in other parts of the country where I can have a little bit more like common grounds and talk about family and like how's life. So
sure.
it's just even just regionally, it's a little bit different, but I've gotten really good at narrowing in of like, what is the pace that I have to work with that person? And how am I going to do that in a way that's going to lead me to the sale and secure the deal at the same time? So it's consistently observing and learning and listening, and then obviously educating myself before I walk into the room with those partners as well.
Absolutely, absolutely. So now when you think of current students that are graduating from college, as you know, it's a very different world now than it was in
Absolutely.
1997.
Yeah.
What kinds of advice would you have for people that are navigating this current job market?
Yeah. So I've a couple thoughts. My first thought is one of my biggest regrets professionally, and what I've seen even now on looking at, resumes of people that are applying for jobs, is doing an internship. And I don't even think the internship necessarily has to be related to exactly like what your perspective, like what your goal or your job is, but it's being able to just say, how to work in a work environment. I think when I look at recent grads and they don't have that, I'm like, oh man, this could be a lot of work to teach them the basics of the protocol and how to do things just in a work environment. And whether
Sure.
that's remote work or if it's like in person. So I think that would be my first thing for them to think about. I also think about the importance of networking, not just with like companies in general, but who does your family know, right? Like, don't be afraid to ask family or friends. I mean, that's really easy to do. And I don't think enough people do that. Like, it's okay to ask your aunt, your uncle, to say, do you know somebody here? Or could you at least set up, an intro so I could just talk to them about what that looks like, in every day in that job.
Hmm.
And then I think the other one that I would highlight, and this is probably something like more recently for me, I had a colleague where we had been talking about kind of what you were saying, Tony, of me going through all these interviews at Habitat, right? The brand behind it. Like I'm representing the brand of that organization. And so I had a colleague, and I remember him and I talking about not, when I'm in this role or anybody's in the role at their job, you're representing the brand that you work for, but you're also representing your own brand. And
Yes.
I thought that was really, really powerful. And there are times that there are going to be situations in your job where you're going to be like, oh, that doesn't feel like that feels ugly to me. But you can't be afraid to say, you know what? My brand, right, would say, I am not doing that. I'm sorry. I will respect this, but ethically, I may feel like this, if this is the right thing to do, then I'm going to stick with that because that is something that's really important to me and my personal brand. And so
Of course.
I think a lot about that, especially in the age of social media, right? So if you're on social media now doing all these things, like employers look at that. And so you have to think about your own personal brand. And if you're putting something out there for people to publicly see, and if I'm sitting here looking at people's resumes or potential hiring someone, I may take a look and say, ooh, I don't know. Like that seems really dangerous. Or we have to really consider like how people represent themselves, even if it is on a social platform, or how they bring themselves, to the table at the same time. So I
Such an
would say
important
that
point.
those absolutely, absolutely. And I think looking and reflecting back on the lessons you've learned, like from mentors or family or whoever else, will help, with your personal brand as well.
Kim, what stands out in your social media presence, let's take LinkedIn. You say this is the Kim Svoboda brand,
Yes.
motivated by positivity.
Right. Right.
How have you always been that way? I mean, how,
Have. I
yeah,
have. And it's interesting because I often I often think I love all my colleagues in my previous jobs, but they all come to me when they're feeling down. And so I'm very empathetic, which is a great skill for somebody to have. but it's also mental, it's exhausting for me sometimes because I do feel like when other people need to be lifted up. And so I try to balance that a little bit because I always want to be the person willing to help, but I also have to look out for my own well-being as at the same time, right?
Yeah.
So I have to be really careful where if someone's going to call me and then an hour later somebody else wants to talk about a situation, so I have to step back a little bit. And again, thinking about my own brand of how to keep myself like mentally okay. But I think it's really important to be able to go into any role or be in a job to really be the person that spreads the positivity and like shines the light. I think that's just really important.
I just find that so refreshing. So what do you see as the future for Kim? You and your partner have a home in
Absolutely.
Florida. You've got a home in Wisconsin.
Wisconsin, yeah.
What do you see happening in, say, the next 10 years for you?
10 years. Yeah, I think yeah, I mean, I absolutely like I love the work that I do, right? I get very excited to wake up every day and really consult with all of these different companies and organizations. It gives me joy to be able to really be creative and think how I'm going to help, connect the dots for everybody. So I vision in the world, again, I'm at that point in my career where I'm happy, things are good, but I think about what does retirement look like, which is a little scary to say that out loud, but I will never be the person that fully retires. Like I probably
Right.
would start consulting work would be really interesting to me. I think that for me would be really important because I wouldn't be losing that skill that I've built so much of my professional career on. So I think about that. I think about really just volunteering and doing more volunteer work personally as well.
Wonderful.
But I think, that to me would be probably the big goal. And I mean, I'm pretty happy I have, a great home and, great support of my family and friends. And I think, again, I hate thinking the idea of retirement because that, like, no, I'm still in my 20s in my mind. But I would
Right.
love to be able to take my knowledge and share it with people. Like,
That's great.
I've been able to acquire so much, information and knowledge and best practices that I've got to find a way to be able to do that in the future and share that with others.
By the way, I'm just thrilled that you're with YMCA. I mean, my
Yes.
wife and I are YMCA members in Oshkosh, and it's
Oh, that's great.
by far one of our favorite institutions in the community.
Excellent.
I mean,
Excellent.
everything about YMCA is about positivity and
Yes.
becoming your best self. And I mean, it's had a really positive impact on me, and I know millions of people across the country. So
Absolutely.
when I saw that you
Absolutely.
were involved with the YMCA, once again, I was like, yes, you,
Yay.
yeah, you really, and I've had nothing but positive experiences with the professional staff at YMCA
Right.
locally. So it's nice to see that nationally they're they gravitate toward people like you. So,
Thank you. Thank you.
so Kim, I'm going to pass on your contact information to current
Perfect.
students, and I'm sure you'd love connecting with people if they
Absolutely.
want to reach out to you. You've got so many now years worth of experiences that they will benefit from hearing. And I just absolutely love what you're saying about the importance of networking, of mentorship. By the way, one more thing on mentorship. You kind of like just almost by accident developed that mentor, right? She saw something in you.
Yeah.
Are there more intentional ways of finding a mentor?
Yeah. I would say what's really important is thinking about finding those mentors on the skill set that you necessarily don't have, right? And so whether that's in the current job that somebody may end up in, or thinking about people outside, like family, friends, or other people, right, that might be in similar jobs that you might have. And so here's a really good example, Tony, is that I'm friends with a lot of other nonprofits. There's nothing wrong with that. We all have our space. We all do like, similar work, right? Especially when we think
Right.
about fundraising. And so when I have a time where I'm like, man, I can't figure this out, or I know I'm really not good at like whatever this task is when it comes to fundraising, I will call that person and ask them for their help and use that person as a potential mentor. And
Excellent.
so I've got a portfolio of people that I can go to at any time, which really is like my portfolio of mentors, right? So I mean, I have the one amazing mentor, but I also have like these side mentors that are in same industry as me but they know that I know I can go to them or vice versa. And I think when you have that little portfolio on the side of those are the people that I know I'm not good at this skill set, they will always be able to listen to me and help guide me with some of the best practices that they do as well.
Thank you so much. I think that's going to be really valuable for our current students to hear. Kim, this has been
Yeah.
great. Let's be
Excellent. Well,
sure to
thank
stay in
you.
touch.
Absolutely. Well, thank
A-
you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. We'll talk to you again soon.
Sounds good. Thank you.
All right.